I was taught that the first human was a man, that God took a rib and made a woman, that the woman tempted and the man obeyed. That knowledge was a sin, and obedience a virtue. I believed it. Then I opened the archive. Ancient clay tablets, Jewish texts you don't learn in school, forgotten Gnostic gospels, and among them, the image of a woman erased before she ever spoke. Her name was Lilith, and she came first. This isn't a story about belief. It's a story about control, about a text that became an instruction manual, about a myth that was declared truth. I don't know who Adam truly was, but I know he was not the beginning and not the end. I'm Moon Whisper, and today we reopen a case older than time. Subscribe to our channel if you crave deep, slow-burning investigations into the stories you thought you knew. And please leave a comment. Where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it right now? We'd love to know where this investigation finds you. The first time I held a fragment of an ancient clay tablet in my hands, I realized something. The story we were told wasn't the full text. Sometimes the truth hides between the lines, right where someone forgot to insert the word that changes everything. I'll start with the obvious. Adam and Eve, names everyone knows, the supposed firsts. But the deeper I searched, the more I saw that first is often a cultural decision, not a chronological fact. First is just what survives in writing, backed by power. So I turned to Sumer, to Akkad, to the peoples who wrote long before Genesis had editors. There are stories of gods and humans, of primordial beginnings, but no Adam, no Eve. Stories, yes, but not this story. I noticed something else in Genesis itself. There are two different versions of human creation. In one, man and woman are created together in the image of God. In the other, man first, then woman from his rib. That word, rib. I had to know more. Because what if that's not what it meant? Hebrew scholars have long debated the term tselah. In most of the Old Testament, it doesn't mean rib. It means side, flank, even chamber or structure. So what if Eve wasn't carved from a bone, but emerged from a side, from something whole, from shared essence, not secondary material? And then comes the name that history tried to erase, Lilith. Who was she? In older Jewish legends, she was Adam's first companion, not submissive, not silent, not sculpted from anyone else. She was equal, and when she was told to obey, she left. She flew from Eden. These aren't just legends, they're warnings. Warnings rewritten, censored, reshaped. I dug deeper. Who turned Lilith into a demon? Who decided that disobedience should wear horns and claws? Why was her name left out of most texts, only to reappear in mysticism, magic, and fear? So before I believe anything, I ask three questions. Are there independent sources that name Lilith as the first woman? Was the rib ever meant to be literal? Or is it a metaphor that got fossilized in translation? Why did the Adam and Eve story become so universal unless it served someone's purpose? I'm Moon Whisper, and I'm opening the door. What's behind it? We don't yet know, but we go there now, because truth never fears a question. When I opened the oldest surviving manuscripts, I realized something disturbing. The lines we were given were only outlines. The full story had been rearranged. And sometimes God goes silent, not because he's absent, but because the text was never finished. I grew up believing the Bible was unshakable, pure, divine. But when I began comparing texts, additions, fragments, and ancient commentaries, a different pattern emerged. One not of certainty, but of edits, revisions, insertions, versions. There's a theory called the documentary hypothesis, and if it's even partially true, it changes everything. It suggests that Genesis and much of the Pentateuch weren't written by a single person, but compiled from multiple sources, each with different names for God, different priorities, different styles. One source calls God Yahweh, intimate, walking in the garden. Another uses Elohim, distant, structured, cosmic. One version has man and woman created together. Another has man first, woman second, from a rib. These are not mere literary quirks. They're fingerprints of different worldviews stitched into one sacred quilt. And that stitchwork? It wasn't seamless. Some seams show. I've spent months comparing Genesis chapter by chapter, line by line, and it's unmistakable. The contradictions, the double stories, the sudden tonal shifts. In one version, humanity appears at the climax of creation, both male and female, equal, made in God's image. In another, man comes first, dust-born, lonely. The woman is crafted later, from his body. Two beginnings. Same book? Same God? Or different editors? Linguistically, stylistically, structurally, something isn't uniform. In parts, the language is poetic, even mythic. Elsewhere, it becomes legalistic, didactic. I began to suspect this wasn't one narrative. This was an assembly. And when compared with ancient Mesopotamian myths, stories of gods molding humans from clay, of defiant women, of divine punishments, it becomes even clearer. Genesis didn't rise in a vacuum. It rose in competition, conversation, maybe even rebellion against older myths. Not everyone agrees. Some scholars argue these differences are literary tools, deliberate repetition for emphasis, theological layering, symbolic retelling. They say Genesis was written with a mind for memory, not logic. Others argue that even if it was a collage, the final editor gave it unity, spiritual coherence, if not historical consistency. And for many believers, this is enough. The message is what matters, not the method. Then there's the question of the missing. How much has been lost? What do we not have? If most of what survives are copies of copies, made centuries apart, how certain can we be of what was ever original? What I found, in my own comparisons, I noticed a pattern. The parts where God speaks most directly are often surrounded by human commentary, narration, justification, reinterpretation, and in one case, the same event, creation, is told two ways. So which came first? The egalitarian image-bearing humans, or the hierarchy with man as origin and woman as byproduct? I turned to ancient commentaries too. Some rabbis long ago asked similar questions, and some hinted at something radical, that the version we received may have been shaped by political and patriarchal forces, systems that benefited from a submissive woman and a culpable man. Because myth isn't just a story, it's a structure, a code, a system for who gets to lead and who is told to obey. I won't pretend to have a final answer, but I've seen enough to ask harder questions. The Adam and Eve myth isn't just spiritual, it's political, psychological, deeply human. And understanding it means admitting this. Someone, somewhere, edited the divine. She came before the word Eve was even born, and though her name was nearly smudged out by time, her story still whispers. I had heard of Lilith as a legend, a myth, a bedtime horror for children, but when I began digging into the sources, texts, folklore, mysticism, I realized Lilith wasn't a side note to Adam and Eve. She might be the missing piece, the erasure that defines the version we inherited. Who was Lilith? According to ancient Jewish traditions, especially Midrashic and Kabbalistic writings, Lilith was Adam's first wife, not pulled from his rib, not created second. She was made at the same time, from the same earth. And when Adam demanded submission, she refused. She left Eden by choice. And from that moment, her image began to change, from partner to demon, from woman to nightmare. In the medieval text, the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith speaks clearly, "I will not lie beneath him, for we are equal." And when neither she nor Adam would yield, she uttered the unspeakable name of God and vanished. She became legend, then demon, then taboo, the case for Lilith as the first woman. Her story appears in early Jewish writings, including Midrash, Talmudic commentary, and mystical Kabbalah. While absent from Genesis, she exists within the traditions that shaped how Genesis was read. Genesis has two creation stories. In the first, man and woman are created together. In the second, woman is pulled from man. The presence of Lilith in oral and mystical tradition fills that textual gap. The prophet Isaiah, 34:14, mentions a creature named Lilith among night beasts and demons. It's cryptic, poetic, and chilling. In magical texts and Jewish amulets, Lilith was feared, invoked, repelled. She was believed to haunt the night, endanger infants, seduce men. Her image morphed into that of independence punished by power. In folklore, Lilith represents what patriarchy couldn't absorb, a woman who said no. The counter-arguments, Lilith is never named in Genesis. One vague poetic reference in Isaiah is hardly a proof of origin. The alphabet of Ben Sira is medieval. That makes it a late invention, not an original part of Genesis, but a midrashic side story with no scriptural authority. Some scholars believe Lilith was retroactively invented to explain or embellish the oddities in Genesis, not a historical or theological necessity, but a myth inserted to add symmetry. Her demonization is inconsistent. In some versions, she's dangerous. In others, seductive. In some, pitiful. The lack of consistency weakens her claim as first. And most importantly, much of Lilith's myth was shaped through mysticism, folklore, and magic. Not canonical theology. That muddies the waters. What Lilith means, when I stare through the layers, I don't see just a myth. I see a symbol. Lilith is not merely the first woman, she is the first erasure, the first no, punished into silence. Her story forces us to ask, is equality so dangerous that it must be demonized? What happens when a woman refuses the role the story has written for her? What if Genesis had kept Lilith and let Eve be the second voice, not the only one? How does our interpretation of rib change when we consider side, as in shared, not subordinate? My conclusion? Lilith may not have walked the garden in the way legend says, but her shadow is real. She is the mirror held up to a system that needed woman to be second, silent, and blamed. And that, perhaps, is why her name still echoes through art, mysticism, rebellion. Even now, I am moon whisper, and I move on to the fruit, the rib, and the crime of knowledge. Truth lies in the details of language, of translation, of art. And sometimes what we take as original was never even part of the first draft. When I first opened the Hebrew Genesis and compared it to the images from stained glass windows and Renaissance paintings, I saw a gap. In the text, there is no apple. There's no mention of a rib as we know it. But in culture, the apple and the rib became gospel. So I began digging. Genesis says only, The fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It doesn't name a fruit, so where did the apple come from? The answer lies in Latin. The word malum in Latin means both evil and apple. In the classical usage, malum, from Greek malon, apple malum, from Latin malus, host evil. This wordplay likely inspired later European translators, artists, and storytellers to equate the forbidden fruit with the apple, a poetic pun that turned into dogma. Art reinforced it. In medieval Europe, the apple was familiar, round, symbolic. Artists like Albrecht Dürer, Lucas Cranach, and the unknown hands behind cathedral windows all reached for the same fruit. Why? Because apples looked good in paintings. Simple as that. There's no evidence the apple existed in any early Jewish understanding of Eden. Some Jewish traditions suggested a fig, a pomegranate, or even wheat. Anything but an apple. But by the time of the Latin Vulgate, late 4th century CE, the apple was visually everywhere. And when art speaks louder than Scripture, people remember the image, not the text. The woman, we are told, was created from Adam's rib. Or was she? The Hebrew word used is tsela, a term that appears over 40 times in the Hebrew Bible. In almost all other cases, it means side, flank, or even structural support in architecture, e.g., sides of the ark, sides of the tabernacle. Studylight.org. Only here, Genesis 2:21-22, is it translated as rib. Why? Some argue it's a later interpretive decision to make the creation of woman seem like a surgical extraction. Others say it was symbolic, to show proximity to the heart. But if tsela means side, then Eve was not made from a bone fragment, but from Adam's whole half. That changes everything. She wasn't taken from below him or behind him. She was his side, equal in structure, a partner, not a byproduct. Philo of Alexandria, c. 20 BCE, 50 CE, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher, interpreted the woman from man story allegorically. He viewed Eve as representing the senses and Adam as the mind. But even he never mentioned a literal rib. In early Jewish commentaries, Midrash, some sages questioned the translation rib. They linked the term tsela to temple architecture, not anatomy. In medieval Christian exegesis, the apple becomes dominant only after Jerome's Vulgate translation and subsequent European iconography. Before that, in early Syriac texts, the fruit is unnamed or symbolic, sometimes even interpreted as wheat, a symbol of divine knowledge. Art played a key role. The apple appears prominently in 15th century Western depictions, while Eastern Orthodox icons tend to avoid it. The Masoretic text, authoritative Hebrew version, Prost 9th century CE, never says rib, but every modern translation seems to assume it. Why? Tradition, familiarity, and visual reinforcement. Counter-arguments. Some argue that even if tsela could mean side, the context of Genesis 2 supports a bodily removal, especially when it says, "He closed up the place with flesh." That sounds like a wound. But others point out the same phrasing is used for the side of the tabernacle, which had no flesh at all. The apple, despite being extra-textual, became a useful teaching tool, a vivid, tangible symbol of desire, disobedience, and loss. So even if it wasn't in the text, it served the story. If Eve came from Adam's side, not his rib, then she wasn't less. She wasn't created after, but alongside. That reading restores parity. If the fruit wasn't an apple, then the myth of feminine temptation tied to the apple falls apart. It wasn't the fruit that mattered. It was the choice. And if both of those details, rib and apple, are mistranslations or later additions, then what else have we inherited that wasn't in the original? The deeper I dig, the more I see. The story we were told isn't wrong. but it's incomplete. The rib was likely a side. The apple was never named. And the sin wasn't sex or disobedience. It was awakening. What they bit into wasn't forbidden fruit. It was consciousness. I'm Moon Whisper, and I'm heading next into the ancient myths that came before Eden. Stories where women were gods, not shadows. Where Genesis falls silent, other voices were already singing, and deep in our DNA, older ancestors still whisper. I started my search in ancient Sumer long before the ink of Genesis had dried. Before Adam, there was Enki. Before Eve, there was Ninmah. Before the serpent slithered through a garden, gods and goddesses shaped people from mud, from breath, from divine whim. The story begins not in Eden, but in the clay temples of Mesopotamia. In one of the oldest myths, Enki and Ninmah, the god of wisdom, Enki, and the mother goddess Ninmah, create humans together. Clay is molded into bodies, divine breath animates them, and soon humans walk the earth. Imperfect, flawed, chaotic. One man cannot bend his limbs. Another cannot hold back his speech. And as they debate who is truly the creator, Ninmah curses Enki. In some versions he is struck with illness, his ribs ache, his organs fail, and a goddess must heal him. That goddess? Sometimes her name is Ninti, meaning Lady of the Rib, or Lady of Life. A coincidence? Perhaps. But the parallels are haunting. A woman formed from a rib, life drawn from pain, a divine conflict. And then another version, Enki and Ninhursag. The god becomes sick again, this time from consuming forbidden plants. Each organ he damages must be healed by a goddess, one for each part. His rib, healed by the goddess Ninti. Yes, again, Lady of the Rib or Lady of Life. Tell me, does it not echo? Before Eve was pulled from Adam's side, Ninti rose from Enki's pain. Let's turn the page, not to scripture, but to science. Mitochondrial Eve, the most recent woman from whom all living humans today inherit their mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child. She lived, scientists estimate, around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Y chromosomal Adam, the man from whom all living men inherit their Y chromosome, passed from father to son. He may have lived around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, also in Africa. They weren't a couple. They didn't meet. They weren't the first humans, just the ones whose genetic line survived. Their peers, their families, their communities, lost to time. But from a genetic standpoint, every human alive today carries a piece of them. This isn't myth. This is mutation, heredity, molecular memory. Biology has its own scriptures, written in double helix, not stone. So, who lived before Adam and Eve? Gods in stories, spirits in temples, humans in bones and blood. Before the garden was planted, there were humans who carved symbols into stone, who painted the walls of caves, who buried their dead with care. Before Eden, there was Enki. Before Eden, there were hunters and midwives, fireside songs, and children named by stars. The biblical story is beautiful, yes, but it is not the first story, and it is not the only one. Adam and Eve are powerful myths, but they were born into a world already ancient, a world with other myths, other mothers, other beginnings. And in our very genes, those silent messengers, the story whispers, you are older than Eden. I walk backward now, even deeper into time, to find the voices that were buried before words. The garden wasn't just a place, it was a blueprint, a map of power, of silence, of gender, of control, and the echoes of that myth still shape the structures we live inside today. Let's begin with the garden, Eden. Why a garden? Why not a temple, a mountain, or a city? What is it about this image, lush, enclosed, fertile, that made it the sacred origin point of humanity's great moral drama? The meaning of Eden. The name Eden likely comes from the Hebrew Eden, meaning delight or pleasure. But Eden is more than just a place of comfort. It's the precondition of obedience, a sacred space under divine jurisdiction. According to Genesis, Adam is not simply created, he is placed in Eden. He doesn't own it, he tends it, he guards it. Eden is not his to shape, it is his to obey. The story begins with stewardship, but quickly becomes about authority, hierarchy, and limits. The garden becomes a moral arena. Within its walls, abundance, beauty, intimacy. At its center, two trees. One grants eternal life, the other, the knowledge of good and evil, is forbidden. This is the first law. The first, do not. And that no becomes the hinge of the human story. Eden as symbol, boundaries, control, obedience. Eden is enclosed. Its borders are explicit. 4 rivers flow out, carving the edges of the world. Inside is divine presence. Outside is exile. It is, essentially, a walled garden of purity. No shame, no fear, no death. Yet. But the condition for staying is obedience. Break the law, and you're out. Not just out of the garden, but out of innocence, out of intimacy with the divine. And in this setup, the woman, Eve, becomes the fulcrum, the one who crosses the line, who chooses, who reaches, who acts. And through her act, sin enters. At least, that's how the narrative was shaped. From this point forward, Eden is no longer just a place. It's a system, a model for how obedience works, how gender works, how punishment is justified. The geography of Eden and its meaning. Many have tried to locate Eden, Mesopotamia, eastern Turkey, the plains of ancient Iran, somewhere near the Tigris and Euphrates, where ancient civilizations flourished. But others suggest Eden was never meant to be a physical location. Instead, it was a cosmological center, a sacred space, like a temple, where God and human could dwell together, a prototype of divine order, a symbol of uncorrupted relationship. In Jewish mystical thought, especially in Kabbalah, Eden is not merely a historical origin, but a layered reality, with a lower Eden, the physical garden, and a higher Eden, a spiritual realm. Eden becomes less a place on a map and more a symbol of idealized existence, a state we lost and perhaps still long for. How Eden became a system of control. This is where things deepen and darken. The Eden myth became more than a story. It became infrastructure, a framework of power, control over the body. The moment Adam and Eve eat the fruit, their eyes are opened. They see they are naked. Shame enters the scene. Modesty is born. Clothing becomes mandatory. From this moment on, the body is no longer neutral. It is suspect, especially hers. Control over the woman Eve is named only after the fall. Before that, she is simply the woman. After the transgression, she is the mother of all living, but also the source of sin. In traditional readings, her act becomes emblematic. Women are temptresses, dangerous, needing discipline. The myth was weaponized, turned into a rationale for patriarchal order. Control over knowledge, the tree is called the knowledge of good and evil. To seek it is a crime. God says, "In the day you eat of it, you will surely die." But they don't die immediately. They awaken. They become aware. What if this crime was not corruption, but evolution? Still, the tradition cast knowledge, especially feminine curiosity, as rebellion. Control over morality and roles. The punishments handed out post-Eden establish hierarchies. The woman will have pain in childbirth. Her desire will be for her husband. He will rule over her. These are not just consequences, they became templates. Blueprints for societal structure, gender roles, family law, passed on, institutionalized, legitimized. In Judaism, the Eden story was commented on in the Midrash, where rabbis debated meanings, implications, alternative readings. Some even softened Eve's role or questioned Adam's responsibility. In Christianity, the story was theological dynamite. The idea of original sin, formulated most clearly by Augustine, positioned Eve as the first sinner, the entry point of death into the world. Her womb was no longer sacred. It was suspect. In Islam, Adam and Hawa, Eve, are both tempted, both disobey, and both are forgiven. The Quran does not vilify the woman specifically, yet Islamic tradition, like many others, absorbed patriarchal readings over time. In Zoroastrianism, in ancient Persian cosmology, the concept of a sacred garden or paradise also exists. But there, evil enters the world through cosmic dualism, not female disobedience. In Eastern traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, the archetype of the woman is not tied to original sin, though the themes of illusion, desire, and attachment still frame the spiritual journey. The idea of the body as a barrier to enlightenment shares echoes with Edenic shame. Eden's trees, life versus knowledge, two trees, two futures, the tree of life, immortality, divine proximity, endless presence, the tree of knowledge, awareness, morality, freedom, but also loss, separation, mortality. When the humans choose knowledge, they're barred from life. It's a stark binary, obedience or autonomy, innocence or consciousness, safety or exile. This tension lies at the heart of human history. The myth suggests to know is to fall, and fallenness becomes the human condition. But what if this is backwards? What if the fall was the beginning of consciousness? What if Eden was never meant to last, but only to provoke? Over centuries, this story wasn't just told, it was enforced. It became part of laws, sermons, textbooks. It justified modesty codes, purity laws, the silencing of women, the sanctification of patriarchy. Eve's act was held up as the origin of all sin. Women were blamed not just for eating, but for wanting, for choosing, for acting. The Eden myth entered canon law. It entered political rhetoric. It was used to argue against female authority, reproductive rights, sexual freedom. It entered art, too, where the woman is always reaching, always tempting, always dangerous. The Garden of Eden is one of the most enduring stories ever told. But it is not neutral. It is architecture. Its trees, rivers, borders, they are more than images. They are frameworks. Its punishments became laws. Its shame became morality. Its silence became custom. And its myth, beautiful, tragic, powerful, became a system. I'm Moon Whisper, and when I look at Eden, I don't just see the beginning of humanity. I see the first page of a contract, one we never signed, but have lived under ever since. A myth doesn't die when people stop believing in it. It changes shape. It hides in customs, in language, in what we call natural. And so people keep living in Eden even if the garden is long gone. I look around, in movies, music, politics, law, and I see the story of Adam and Eve still defining who has the right to speak, who must be ashamed, who gets power. And the trick is, we often don't notice it, because we were raised inside it. The first time I saw Eve in a film or painting, she was holding an apple, or standing next to it, the temptation. In Renaissance art, Botticelli, Bosch, Eve is beautiful and dangerous. In modern cinema, the woman who ruins, who acts, who chooses, she's everywhere. Her story just keeps changing costumes. And yet today, writers, artists, philosophers are turning the narrative inside out. They're asking, what if Eve didn't fall, but rose? What if her desire wasn't a flaw, but freedom? What if knowledge was never the sin, but the start of everything? Across societies, laws about women's roles still echo Eden. She must be quiet, modest, submissive. Her body is still labeled tempting, still regulated, still watched. The idea that her choices are dangerous didn't die with Genesis. It adapted. It passed into courts, pulpits, and schools, and it doesn't end with women. The myth defines how we see sin, shame, authority, even parenting. We shame curiosity. We punish those who cross invisible lines. We ask people to stay obedient, not informed, and that's still Eden. Meanwhile, science offers new versions of the forbidden fruit. Gene editing, AI, cognitive expansion, tools that let us shape reality. And again, we hear the old question, should we eat from the tree? Should we know? The myth lingers in how we argue about morality, freedom, knowledge. It sneaks into ethical debates and tells us, don't go too far, don't reach too high, or you'll lose paradise. But maybe Eden wasn't paradise. Maybe it was a test. I don't believe we can erase Eden, but we can learn to read it differently. When new voices take the stage, voices that were once silenced, the myth begins to change. We stop fearing the fall. We start seeing it as an awakening. I'm Moon Whisper. And as I close this investigation, I leave you not with answers, but with a challenge. Ask yourself, what myth still governs me? And do I choose to keep it? Because myth is not just memory, it's machinery. And we get to decide what we build next. If this journey into Eden stirred something in you, subscribe to Moon Whisper's History. These aren't just stories. They're investigations. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Because myths might be ancient, but the questions they raise are very much alive. If this journey through Eden sparked something in you, subscribe to Moon Whisper's History. These are not stories. These are investigations. And next time, we're going even deeper. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. We're mapping the world's myths together.